Torah and coming on the clouds. And if we could give a definite answer, is this what we'll see? Basically what does it all mean? So, you have a handout. Part 1 is 10 pages to give us a foundation of what we'll discuss in part 2 when we actually get to the meat of the subject. But hopefully we'll be able to start to get some semblance of an answer to the question. Let's talk to our Elohim and ask for his help. And then we'll take a look at what I hope is going to be a very interesting study for us, and hopefully something that is going to bring us in a lot closer relationship with our Elohim. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, open our hearts, so that we can see, hear, and understand what your word has to tell us. And we thank you for it all. In the name of Yahshua. Amen. All right. So we'll just call this the commentary on Matthew 24, 30 through 31. Now, Matthew 24, 30 through 31 has a counterpart, we could say, in 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 17. These are probably amongst the most misunderstood and misinterpreted verses that we're going to find in the Bible. They have been the subject of a lot of doctrine within the Christian world, and the Catholics used this tremendously to their advantage back in the 1500s, shortly after what was called the Massacre of St. Bartholomew, where basically the Catholic Church endorsed the massacre of Protestants in France, and say 10,000 people died. They said 70,000 people died because it wasn't just within Paris, but this was countrywide that this took place. And it was the Jesuits that actually came up with this, I guess, this prophecy idea for Revelation. But they're also the ones that started the ball rolling on the rapture theory and everything else. And the rapture theory didn't take root until 1830 with James Darby. But these two verses have been the source of a lot of controversy over the years. In order to understand anything in Torah, and we've said it before, we have to go to the beginning. And then it has to line up in the middle, and it has to be proved in the end. We can't just take two verses and say, this is what it means. So in order to do this study, we're going to go back and basically take a journey through the Torah, the writings, the prophets, Brit Hadashah, and our next go-around will end up in the book of Revelation, finishing everything up so that we can understand what these verses say. But we've got a couple of different translations of this verse. The first verses that we're going to read here are basically what we would find out of New American Standard Bible or King Jimmy, with the exception that God has been changed into Elohim, and the names have been changed to make it right. But Matthew 24, 30 through 31 says, "And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his messengers with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." Then Thessalonians, what's going on in Thessalonians when Paul makes these statements is there's a great deal of persecution taking place, and there's been a lot of very dear people that have been killed in this persecution. So Paul is actually trying to comfort the assembly at Thessalonica. So we're going to start at 1 Thessalonians 4:13 through 17. It says, "But we do not want you to be uninformed, brethren, about those who are asleep," these people that have been killed, "so that you will not grieve as do the rest who have no hope." Now, hope is a very interesting word because in the Aramaic, it doesn't use the word evangelion that we translated into gospel or even good news. It uses the word servarta, which means hope. So hope is an interesting concept that we find through Brit Hadashah that we need to grab onto, but we lose that when we change the idea of hope with the idea of a gospel or a good news or a testament. So, "For if we believe that Yahshua died and rose again, even so Elohim will bring with him those who have fallen asleep in Yahshua. For this we say to you by the word of our Master, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of our Master will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For our Master himself will descend from heaven with a mandate, and the voice of the chief messenger and the trumpet of Elohim, and the dead in Mashiach will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet our Master in the air, so that we will always be with our Master." Okay? We see a lot of things in here that have been grossly misrepresented. We're not going to touch on them in the scope of this study. We will touch on those things in the scope of next week's study. But this is what we read in our Bibles. Okay? So we haven't touched much, if at all, on the Aramaic of Brit Hadashah. We're going to have to deconstruct our verses using Aramaic in order to find our way to the scriptures of the Torah, the prophets and the writings that are going to give us the information that we need on these. Doing this is going to force us to take time in completing the study, but we're going to learn a great deal in the process. Now, this next page, don't freak out, okay? What we have here is the top line is the actual Aramaic of the verse. The middle line is still Aramaic, but using the Hebrew fonts because we're more familiar with the Hebrew fonts, and then, of course, we have the English interpretation. But from the Aramaic, this is what these verses say. Again, Matthew 24:30 says, "And then shall be seen the standard of the Son of Man in heaven, and then all the generations of the earth shall wail, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with great power and glory." Now, we should start hopefully having bells going off when it says generations, because we see the word generations all throughout Torah when it's talking about genealogies, but specifically it talks about generations in the Ten Commandments in Shemot, when he's talking about the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and to the thousands that love me and keep my commandments. So there's something that we will see in our next study of this when we start to tear these apart. Then it goes on, Matthew 24:31, "And he shall send his messengers with the great trumpet, and they shall gather the chosen who are his from the four winds and from the ends of heaven." His chosen who are his. Okay? Now, Thessalonians reads, "But I wish you to know, my brethren, that for those who are asleep you should not have sorrow, as the rest of men who have no hope." Basically, it tells us the same thing. Thessalonians 4:14 says, "For if we believe that Yeshua died and arose," Yeshua is the Aramaic of Yahshua. So we say Yeshua, we say Yahshua. Either one of us is correct because they both mean the same thing. So that if we believe that Yeshua died and arose, so also Aloha. Aloha is the Aramaic of Elohe, which is Elohim. And we can say that aloha, that Aramaic is what progressed from Aramaic became Arabic. So we have in aloha, we see perhaps where Islam gets their idea of Allah. That simply means, it doesn't mean mighty one. They have simply translated as something that says God, that we've come to understand really has no meaning. So, but anyway, that Yeshua died and arose, so also aloha, those who have slept in Yeshua, will bring with him. That's aloha will bring those who have slept in Yeshua with him. Those who are restored will rise. Okay. And then it goes on to say, but this we say to you by the word of our master. And this, our master is something that when we take a look at it is going to tell us huge amounts, because the word here that's used, the root of it is Maria. It tells us more than simply master, but it's saying Master Yahuwah is what this word is actually telling us. But for now, we're just looking at it how it would translate. This is according to Murdoch, one of the Aramaic translators of, this is the Colubris text of Aramaic from the Peshitta. There's a Peshitta and there's a Peshito. One is more accurate than the other. So, anyway. But this we say to you by the word of our master, that we who may be remaining at the coming of our master, we who then may live, will not precede those who have slept. What this is alluding to is that Paul understands that this may not happen during his lifetime. Okay? He's saying those who may be, we may be, but not necessarily will be. Okay? For our master himself, with the mandate, there's this mandate again, and with the voice of the chief messengers and with the trumpet of aloha will come down from heaven, and the dead who are in Moshiach will arise first. And then we who remain alive shall be caught up with him together in the expanse. Okay, where's the first time that we see the word expanse in Torah? It's in Bereshit 1:1 that he created a firmament. He created an expanse to separate the waters above from the waters below. This is a very important thing that we catch when we start to look at it in the Aramaic, because everything in Bereshit 1:1 is going to come into play within these verses. Remember our helix, that the helix runs, but eventually the helix stops, because you can only screw a screw in so far before it bottoms out. And the helix does have an end. Time does come to an end at one point, or will eventually come to an end. But caught together in the expanse to the meeting of our master in the expanse, and so always with our master shall we be. So we have a lot of stuff within the Aramaic that is going to begin to pose questions. What does this mean? What does this mean? And I encourage you between now and Tuesday, if y'all can make it, or Friday if you can't, start looking at these Aramaic scriptures and start to see some words that look familiar from Torah, and go back and say, where did this occur? Where's the first time that we see this word? Where's the first time that we find the word cloud? And I might be jumping ahead a little bit next week, but the first time that we see cloud in the Torah is when Elohim puts the bow in the cloud as a sign that he will not destroy humankind again. It's a sign of a covenant between Elohim and Noah. So it's the first time we see cloud, but in the cloud is a word, kara, which is bow. This is not necessarily a rainbow as much as it is a bow that shoots an arrow. We say the root of Torah is yara, which means to shoot an arrow. And then we start to break down these verses in Aramaic, we're going to see something that's really, really amazing as to what is actually coming in the clouds. Okay? So, we can't begin our study here because there's too many questions that we have to investigate. We have to begin at the beginning to consider the reason for Torah itself. Yet even for this, we have to begin at Bereshit 1:2. Remember, helical time. We're going to start at the reason for everything to take place. And it simply says, "Now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim hovered over the face of the waters." And we look at this and we say, oh, that's the creation story. But what we're going to find is that this verse is explaining the condition of humankind over and over and over again when he is separated from Yahweh Elohim. It is in this verse that we consider the state of humankind without a relationship with Yahweh Elohim. Transgression brings us to this point. The purpose of Torah is very simply to instruct us as to how to have a relationship with Yahweh Elohim and how to have a relationship with one another. We have learned that Torah time is helical, so there has to be a way to reverse transgression and this empty state of being separated from Yahweh Elohim. So if there is a point of transgression, there has to be a way to reverse the transgression. And we find this plan in Bereshit 1:1. In English it says, "In the beginning Elohim created the heavens and the earth." In Hebrew it says, "Bereshit bara Elohim et kashamayim va'et haaretz." So in order to understand, we have to break down the Hebrew of this verse and decipher its message and meaning. And we've done this several times, but for the purpose of the study, just bear with me. We'll do it again because it's really important that we understand this verse. This verse is critical to our understanding what we're going to study in these verses out of Brit Hadashah. So we have to break this down. We have to do this. We have to have a firm grasp of the meanings of the Hebrew letters themselves. And that class, I'm going to postpone it from September probably until, I don't know, maybe November, even to after the first of the year, until we get some more interest built up. So anyway.
Which class?
Huh?
4-hour.
The class on the Hebrew
Yes,
letters.
yes,
But we
yes. Check,
begin,
check it.
Not just the letters.
we begin with the word Bereshit. And Bereshit, Bereshit, let's start over here because it's easier. Can everybody see? Bereshit. We begin with this word. What we find here is that in Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz, or in the beginning, Yahweh or Elohim created the heavens and the earth. What we find here and what we can say is that time came into being. That in this verse, Elohim created time, space, and matter. But we have to look at it from a different point of view. Yes, we can consider that he created time as a true statement, but there's a whole lot more to it than simply that. We begin by considering the bait. Now, the bait in Torah is larger than the other letters. Okay? There are 3,000 rules or more that govern the writing of a Torah scroll. And one of those rules, the simple rule, is that all the letters have to be the same size. If any letter is larger than the other letters, that page of Torah has to be removed and you have to start over because you can't erase anything. Okay? But in this case, for several millennia, this bait has remained enlarged. It's bigger than the rest of the letters. What the rabbis tell us is that it